Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 254, Confidence Building Strategies. Back in the early noughties, I was a delegate on a course and, as might be expected in that setting, I was asked a question by the trainer. Now, I'm not the sort of introvert who dreads this happening. I'm a trainer myself, after all. But I do have the classic introvert communication process of think, say, think. Let me explain. When I'm asked a question, like many introverts, unless it's a subject that I'm very familiar with and know the answer to, I like to think about how I'm going to respond. I want any answer I give to be considered and a truthful reflection of me and my thoughts. Maybe you recognise that in yourself too. So I wasn't really surprised that whilst I was considering my answer, the trainer asked someone else the same question. But I was surprised that he didn't come back to me for my answer. Some of you will have heard this before, but let me explain what happened next. At the end of the course, the trainer gave me the following feedback. Jo, you're a low responder who lacks confidence. I suggest you work on those things if you want to be successful. You could have knocked me down with a feather in that moment, and I'm sure that I sat there presenting a passable image of a goldfish, opening and closing my mouth but saying nothing. Sadly, that probably confirmed to the trainer how on the money he was with his wisdom and advice. Now, the reality is that neither of his perceptions were true, but I can now see that if you don't understand how an introvert functions, those perceptions may appear accurate. It's often assumed that introverts lack confidence because people expect them to measure up against how an extrovert behaves in the same environment or situation. It's this reality that has got so many introverts pretending to be something they're not in order to fit in and get on, just like I did for far too long. So in this episode, I'll be busting more myths. Or is it the same myth that needs continually busting? I'll let you be the judge of that. In addition, I'll be sharing some of my confidence building strategies. So let's start by defining what we really mean by confidence. This has actually been a topic of interest to me for many years, partly because of that misjudged feedback that was levelled at me. And around the same time, I remember watching a series on the BBC called The Confidence Lab. Unsurprisingly, the two experts involved defined confidence as a combination of self-belief, self-assurance, and the ability to act effectively in challenging or unfamiliar situations. The most important thing this programme focused on was that confidence is not an innate trait, but a skill that we can develop if we choose to. Much later, I found my guru on confidence, Dr. Yeung, who succinctly defines confidence as the ability to take appropriate and effective action, however challenging it may feel at the time. This definition appeals to me for a number of reasons, the main one being that it's about doing things we're not comfortable with. So many people mistake confidence as never feeling fear or worry or nerves or anxiety, but this is simply not true. It's taking action even though we feel those things, because we understand the longer-term benefits and are committed to realising them. This means we are learning to manage those potentially paralysing feelings, to override them or overcome them in some way. So we might also deduce that a lack of confidence is the inability to manage those feelings or emotions. But there are a few more things that confidence isn't. It isn't the same as arrogance, The motivation or intention behind confidence and arrogance is quite different. Confidence stems from that self-assurance, that interiority that Caroline McHugh talks about in her TED Talk, whereas arrogance is born of the need to prove superiority, although ironically it often masks insecurity. The evident behaviour is also quite different. Confidence is calm, positive and assertive, whereas arrogance is dismissive and domineering. So being loud is not a sign of confidence. In fact, I could argue that it's a sign of excitability at best and arrogance at worst. Which is great news for we introverts, don't you think? The best example of confidence I think I ever witnessed was a quiet junior manager who said very little during a heated debate involving his seniors, which was in danger of getting out of control. All of a sudden, he coughed, leant forward in his seat, quite uncharacteristically, held up his hand and calmly said, "What I've witnessed over the past 15 minutes is you all being in violent agreement with each other, but none of you are listening sufficiently to notice that. I invite you to spend a few moments summarising your positions and interests one by one." That was the perfect intervention and required great confidence, as he was one of the most junior in the room. But as a result, these senior leaders often looked to him to take charge when things were going a bit pear-shaped. So I'm a big fan of quiet confidence. It may even be understated in that it's not on show all of the time. It's not a badge of office, but it is to hand whenever it is needed. We see this kind of confidence in those who are thoughtful and reflective, the observers who let things reveal themselves rather than jumping to assumptions, the listeners whose intention is to understand rather than simply respond, the measured orators who take their time and use pauses to good effect. That is the quiet confidence that I admire and am inspired by. But where does that kind of confidence come from? We know it's not an innate trait, so how do we develop the ability to have that quiet confidence to hand? It starts with being really secure in your strengths, talents, and abilities. This develops over time as you embrace your introversion fully and focus on your successes. Of course, there will be development areas that become apparent, but the quietly confident introvert spends time working on what can be improved in order to minimise that which can't. I've mentioned the value of undertaking a strengths audit on a recent podcast, and to build confidence is one of the reasons why I encourage that practice. Moving on, that requires a positive growth mindset and empowering beliefs. The primary reason some of my clients have struggled with their confidence is that they allow their self-limiting beliefs to keep them anchored and preventing them from moving forward. Do you know how frustrating that is for the human psyche? We are inherently hardwired for growth that's driven by evolutionary, biological and psychological mechanisms that encourage learning, adaptation and self-improvement. It takes more effort to fight that natural tendency than it does to go with those drivers of change. We know that the very definition of flourishing includes navigating the peaks and valleys of life. So we know it will not all be smooth sailing. So we need to find the learning in those challenging times. And given this work, we need to look after ourselves energetically and emotionally. Taking the necessary time to pre-charge and recharge makes a world of difference. And it's not egocentric or selfish, it's self-care, which I explored in detail in the last episode. Many of us struggle with this given our family situations or working life, But remember that it's a need for we introverts, not a nice to have. And each of us will have different types and durations of charging. We cannot compare or judge someone for what they need if it's different to us. It's why I recommend families create their needs charts as a cohesive unit, and why I suggested that managers might explore that with their teams as well. Finally, I know that I tend to feel more confident when I've been able to prepare, but there is also a danger that we overthink our preparation, at which point it becomes counterproductive. I've found that there is something magical that happens when the first 3 points I've just mentioned, being secure about your strengths, having the right mindset, and the necessary charge in my batteries, means that I can feel more confident even when thrown into a situation at the last minute. I trust myself to be able to deal with whatever comes my way calmly. And no, that doesn't mean I'll be winging it or blagging. I'll be able to say something like, although I've not been able to give this much consideration, here are my initial thoughts. I'll be honest and vulnerable and still have presence. That is quiet confidence. Now, I've already mentioned that life doesn't always go according to plan, so it doesn't hurt to be on the lookout for potholes that may knock a tyre off its rim. They're blooming annoying and everywhere nowadays, it seems. But did you know that you create some of those potholes? What do you mean, I hear you cry indignantly? Well, how about those times you overcommit or fall into the trap of people-pleasing, or you cave into the pressure to comply with the extrovert ideal, or you give your inner critic too much credence? I know just how persuasive the inner critic can be, but knowing what scares yours and what it's trying to keep you safe from is really revealing. The thing to avoid at all costs, though, is self-gaslighting, which I talked about in episode 217. Now, as per the title of this episode, you're expecting some strategies, so it's about time I mentioned them, don't you think? And I want to be clear here that when I'm talking about strategies, I'm talking about the overarching plans that focus on cultivating enduring habits and attitudes that guide our long-term development. They will, of course, have actionable steps, and it's rather down to you to decide which steps are right for you. Given Yeung's definition, I propose that your strategies need to enable the following habits and attitudes: calmness under pressure, adaptability, empathy, humility, and authenticity. Starting with calmness under pressure, this is about developing a regular mindfulness practice, focusing on breathing and remaining centered. It helps if you identify your sources of pressure and have plans for how you'll manage as many of them as possible. And recognize that pressure is an invitation to grow and develop. It's not a foe that's out to get you. So notice where your thoughts are serving you and where you might need to apply a reframe. And if your beliefs are limiting you in some way, flip them realistically so they are more empowering. On that note, do take a look at the self-paced course called Flip Your Limiting Beliefs. You won't regret that. When it comes to developing your adaptability, the best practice is to hold things lightly. This means we don't get attached to a specific outcome of how things should happen. Shoulds are usually very unhelpful anyway. A useful approach here is to get into the habit of looking at what is in your control and what isn't, so that you can focus your precious energies effectively. And remember, it's often about doing lots of things a little bit differently, that marginal gain technology, rather than changing one thing in a big way. Next, having and demonstrating empathy is a core component of emotional intelligence, so make a habit of understanding someone else's perspective, their life position or circumstances, and how they might feel given the hand that they've been dealt. this allows you to be an authentic ally to them. And because behaviour breeds behaviour, your allyship and confidence has the ability to change their behaviour as you will impact the other person positively. And there's a side note here, which is that you need to have empathy for yourself too. So please be kind to you. As we now turn our attention to humility, which in my opinion is one of the most desirable leadership behaviours, we find that it is often misunderstood. The most confident people are those who demonstrate genuine humility. And this is not about being self-deprecating, underestimating your worth, or having an inferiority complex. It's not about being weak either. According to positive psychology, and you know I'm a big fan, humility is the recognition and acceptance of one's limitations and imperfections. It involves an accurate self-perception, modest self-portrayal, and a focus on others rather than oneself, allowing for personal growth and better relationships. That's why it's such a powerful leadership quality in my eyes. And I think we all have examples of where this is needed more. So the habit to get into here is to, with compassion and gratitude, acknowledge your mistakes, ask for and explore feedback, and stay open to the learning. Now, all of these will in turn both develop and refine your authenticity. This is about living in accordance with your personal ethics, your morals, and your values. And we are all work in progress, so it's not unusual for some of these to be aspirational. Clearly, the foundation is doing the work so you know what they are and can therefore hold yourself accountable. This is what will enable you to be in alignment with the most fully expressed you rather than conforming or complying to some external pressure. A word of warning here though, you may find that you lose some so-called friends or choose to distance yourself from some people. That's what comes with authentic confidence. When you start upholding healthy boundaries, those who are breaching them often get upset. So these 5 areas create the framework for your confidence strategies, under which you'll have numerous tactics, tools and techniques. Use them intentionally and make a note of what is working well and what needs some refinement. We are all work in progress, remember? Building your confidence so it allows you to step into your quiet power and be authentically you is foundational to a fulfilled life where you are flourishing. Whether you're conscious of it or not, you already have many of the skills and abilities needed, but maybe you've stored them away and need to rummage to find them again. That's certainly been the case for many of my clients. So it may seem like a tall order, but remember you are never alone in your quest. You can access support and encouragement through the Facebook group Introverts Corner or the LinkedIn group Introverts Round Table, where every voice matters. And for those of you who already have the basics of confidence mastered, we are soon opening the doors to the Sassy Introvert Society. If you want to be a founding member, just drop us a line to quietly@flourishingintroverts.com and my team will add you to the waiting list. For now, remember that confidence isn't about never being scared. It's about feeling the fear and doing it anyway, as Susan Jeffers always said. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.